Good morning. Have you ever gone to the meeting tent with Moses? I'm going to go back here to just point out something else. The meeting tent, which was outside the camp. The camp must have been a noisy place. Imagine, actually we could go down through the camping site now just to get an idea. And then there was a tent outside, the meeting tent. And those tents had a special name, and a very simple name for tent in Hebrew, succah. And that's the feast of Sukkot. And we know it more commonly in English, I think, as the Feast of Tabernacles. And Moses would meet with God in the tabernacle. And what do we call this little structure here on the altar beside the mast? Okay, there's somebody there. So you see the mast here? The mast of the boat. This is the boat altar in Magdala. You can't see it too well. If you're brand new to this, to Magdala, then just go on the website magdala.org and see some more pictures, and go to the section where it says, I think, visit, and there in the that page inside the website magdala.org, and do the tab visit, and then you'll see the boat altar chapel, and then you can see the boat altar better. But this is an altar in the shape of a boat in there. And then that structure beside the mast is called a tabernacle. And always in Catholic churches, there's a tabernacle at the altar, or in a separate little chapel, or beside the altar, depending on the architecture of the building. And in this case, it's on the boat, because the boat is also representing Jesus' public ministry, and Jesus was asleep in the boat. I can see this better from this angle here. There you can see a little bit of the boat structure now, and the light. It's a question of getting the light, and then you have all the reflections of the mast on the big windows separating the boat chapel from the women's atrium. With that box, you see, the fishermen had a box for bread, for food in their boats, and then we have that whole story of Jesus asleep in the boat and the disciples waking him up. And Moses went out to the tent, the meeting tent. One of the thoughts that occurred to me, I had the blessing, our community, we went in December for a few years, quite a few years, to different spots outside of Israel of biblical lands. We were blessed to go to Jordan, to Lebanon. You can see the mountains on the Lebanese border up there. And we were blessed to go to Cyprus and also to Egypt 3 times, once to Mount Sinai. And we went twice to the main part of Egypt, and we saw the temples, and the temples are massive. The temples that are there from the time of Moses, and before Moses, and after Moses. And they're still standing, sometimes in a ruined form, and sometimes it's just major structures, incredibly impressive, imposing columns, and the sense of the Egyptian people before the divinity was very, very strong. And they expressed the power of God in these temples. And there we have Moses going out to meet God in a tent. Such an incredibly fragile structure. You know, a tent is easily folded up and disappears. I've actually seen that myself with the Bedouins in the Judean desert. When they move their structures, they have they're not really tents, but they have sometimes corrugated iron and some wood, and they make structures and they move their places very easily. Nomadic people. And God is in a tent with his people. You know, when we have the word, I am with you always till the end of time, Emmanuel is God with us. And God is in a tent with us. I remember it made a big impression on me when I went to get familiar with our presence serving the Mayan people in the Yucatan Peninsula, especially in the inland areas. And the people had these little huts where they lived, made with bamboo-like sticks. And sometimes they had a second chamber if they were a little bit bigger. And they had a little spot where they kept the food, a separate little space, and they were thatched or covered with leaf material from plants. And then the chapels were like that also. Now there's also a very other interesting thought. I really recommend that you read that reading that we have there, the first reading today of the tent, because when the incarnation happens, and if we look at John's Gospel in the prologue, the word that's used is he tented among us. He set up his tent among us. He took on human flesh, human nature, and he lived among us. And this is God's great way of being present. And this matches very much with the story that's being told, because at this moment we're seeing God in and humanity, Moses and the people, in a very special circumstance, and it is after the golden calf, which is a very horrible experience of great degradation and a very low level. After promising we will do everything God wants, the human being is so fickle and then worships a golden calf, makes a golden calf and worships a golden calf. It's a tremendous crisis of identity, of who we are. Last week this park was completely filled with Arab people, Muslim mostly. And I remember meeting one guy, he was Jewish. You remember that when they were celebrating the feast of El-Ida, the sacrifice of Ishmael. And today and yesterday and the day before, it's completely filled with Orthodox Jewish people. And it's very tightly packed. So you could imagine a camp. Now they're barely waking up, so I'm going to go all around here to avoid them and leave them more privacy. I won't invade their area because it's so packed. I've never seen it this packed with, I would think there are hundreds of tents here. We see a Jewish man praying in the morning. We also need to pray for a great care in issues of health, because the number of cases have been increasing again recently, and the last thing we need is another lockdown. But hopefully people will be more disciplined now. But there we have a camp. You see, we saw all the tents. And this is a tent. This kind of timely now we see this, and also the intensity of the tents. They're so packed together, so many of them. Little girl, here's the cute. So many families with their children, and maybe their economic circumstances aren't that great, and these children can't tell the difference between a Mercedes and and a small little second-hand or third-hand car. Oh, there are some of our red flowers. Look at that. We were looking for them the other day. I'm not sure if they're the exact same, but the same structure. Look at that. Look at these little flowers. And just to get you an idea of the size, that's my finger. And there we have these other white ones. We're very familiar with these. So they're a little bit more shaded here, sheltered from the sun, so I guess they're a little later. And they're blooming. Tiny, tiny, tiny little flowers. And here we have the ruins of Magdalene in its most concentrated archaeological part of the Franciscans. Here there are, I think, 1700 years of archaeology. Let me see if I can focus better for you. There we are. So we have this all this reality of the tent, of the camp, and then of going out to a tent outside the camp to have the quiet we need from the noise and bustle of daily life to meet with God. And that's just part of today's reading. The bigger part of that's big enough in itself and significant and very rich. But, it's the message of today that God is merciful, and the challenge for the human being to, let's say, negotiate, let's say, maybe the word is like wrought iron. Have you ever seen iron being wrought with the fire and the hammer? And as a child, it was fascinating to go to a smith when they were shoeing the horses or making an iron gate. I'm going to cross over here for you to see the destruction of the fire. I don't think we've walked along here for a while. Actually, I don't think we've ever been live at this point. I'm thinking if I can get in over here someplace and we can get real up close to it. I can't communicate the smell of the burned area. But in a certain sense, evil deeds give us this effect of total burn. The one good thing about this fire is that it has exposed the whole area, because even in the wintertime or the summertime is kind of our winter in a way, it's so dry and hot, but the vegetation still covers the site. So I've never seen the site this revealed. In the wintertime with the rain, it's fresh green growth, very lush all over this area. And now we see all of this is exposed. And you can see a stone like this is obviously worked. So whereas this stone might have been worked something as well, but it's much more in its natural form. And this would be probably from archaeology, like this one here as well. And this one here. When you see that rectangular form in a consistent, regular way, it's hardly straight from nature. It's got human intervention. So look at this area here. You know, we're always in such a fragile world. I see lots of barbed wire here. I need to be careful walking. We think of California, all the suffering right now with the fires in the west of the Americas. We're so fragile, we're in such a fragile world. And then in the heat of the fire, the iron is forged. In a certain sense, the experience of guilt is a forge. it's a furnace that is so uncomfortable. Guilt is an incredible experience. And one of the beauties of revelation of God, and especially in this chapter, of one of the most dastardly acts of treachery toward God, worshipping the golden calf, in processing that whole reality in their hearts, God reveals himself to them as merciful, most merciful. And that's a great thing, when we go through the misfortune of doing evil, that we are then blessed. Oh, I see what happened here. You see all this big pile of stones. So this was obviously cleared from here at some point with probably like a bulldozer or something, taking all the stones off this field to make it a more usable field. But it has been abandoned for quite some time. At least I have never seen it in an agriculturally well-used condition. So in the forge of guilt, in that circumstance, that incredible furnace of guilt, allowing God to be present. Some people carry tremendous guilt with them. Imagine somebody that has committed murder. And there's a famous man who used to stand before audiences. He's passed away already, Bernard Nathanson. And he's one man who suffered tremendously from guilt. But he was blessed with an experience of mercy, and he would stand before audiences and say, with these hands I have killed over 75,000 people. You can Google them. And for some people, it's like they're buried under a pile of guilt. And to be able to come out and discover God as merciful. You see that stone there is also from archaeology for sure. And this one here as well is even very cut. Look at the ledges. It's actually a door threshold. I know that little bit already. Look at this here. You see the cut here? And that's for a hinge of the door. And there's another one over there. Wow, but that would be hard to put back together again. Humpty Dumpty with his egg that fell and put it back together again. Let's keep pushing up this way here. There's a little bit more further up. There's another one. Scorched earth policy. Armies go in and burn everything ahead of them, leave nothing so the enemy can't stand up again. A strategy that has often been used, but in the scorched earth of the human soul, through sin, God allows a new springtime to come. And that's what's going to happen here. It will be exciting now. It's good that we did this little trip here. It will be exciting now in the springtime to see. Tell me what this is. And then we have another stone, more or less, there. That long one. It's been pretty chiseled, and there's another one. So in the scorched earth policy of guilt, there's a springtime possible. And that trust in God, that trust in God for His intervention, His revelation of mercy. The Lord is kind and merciful to the 1,000th generation for those who love Him, who fear Him. So even the guilty person can actually connect with God in a powerful way. In the immense and utter poverty of guilt, the guilty person doesn't have any points, any thing to lean on. Imagine that man with all that murder on his hands. And people bear that guilt, and it can be very destructive of all hope and optimism and joy. and good relationships with others, people can become very aggressive, very harsh, very violent. In fact, the stories of a lot of prisoners are that since childhood they were very, very unjustly treated. Their dignity was stomped upon, and they adopted those ways of brutality and ended up in high security prison. To discover mercy, to discover God's forgiveness. His mercy is to the 1000th generation. And yet there's also the whole issue of justice. And this comes out in the gospel passage today with the weeds. The weeds and the good crop, the good harvest. So I think we've lots of impressions and thoughts for today, and we'll leave it like that now. And I wish you many, many blessings with the fire of the final judgment, with the fire of God's mercy, and the fire of guilt. People, let's go for the fire of God's mercy, and let it burn up all of the weeds, and let us grow to honor and love and live for God's goodness and to spread it in our world. God bless you people. See you later, alligators.